Wealthy man lost wallet in storm. Homeless woman who returned it got more than she ever hoped. The evening sky over downtown Seattle darkened ominously as storm clouds gathered like an army preparing for battle. In the gleaming towers of the financial district, most people had already retreated to the safety of their homes. But Robert Henderson was still in his corner office on the 40th floor, packing his briefcase with the methodical precision of a man who had built his fortune on attention to detail. At 52, Robert carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had weathered many storms in business, though none had prepared him for the personal tempest that had torn through his life 2 years earlier when cancer claimed his beloved wife, Margaret. Tonight, he was determined not to break another promise to his daughter, Sarah, who had been patiently trying to rebuild their relationship one dinner at a time. As Robert slipped his expensive leather wallet into his jacket pocket, he barely noticed that it wasn't fully secured. The wallet contained more than $800 in cash, several credit cards, and most importantly, the last photograph he had taken of Margaret before she became too ill to smile for the camera. It was a treasure more valuable than all his business assets combined. Meanwhile, across the city beneath a concrete overpass, Elena Martinez was preparing for another night of survival. At 38, her weathered face told the story of someone who had fallen from grace and was fighting every day to maintain her dignity in circumstances that stripped it away piece by piece. Her shopping cart contained everything she owned in the world, protected by a carefully arranged tarp that had seen her through countless storms. Elena's most precious possession wasn't visible to anyone who might pass by: a crumpled photograph of her daughter Sophia, taken just months before the medical bills and grief had consumed everything she had worked to build. She had been a registered nurse once, with her own apartment, a reliable car, and a future that seemed secure. That life felt like someone else's story now. The storm that hit Seattle that night was unlike anything the city had seen in years. Wind speeds reached dangerous levels, and rain fell with the intensity of nature's fury unleashed. Robert, caught between his parking garage and his car, struggled against gusts that seemed determined to claim everything in their path. In one violent moment, as he fought to maintain his balance, his wallet was ripped from his pocket by the wind and tumbled across the flooded pavement, disappearing into a storm drain clogged with debris. Robert never noticed his loss. His only focus was reaching the safety of his vehicle and getting home to Sarah, who would be waiting with dinner and the kind of worried expression that reminded him painfully of her mother. Under her concrete shelter, Elena listened to the storm rage above her with the stoic patience of someone who had learned that everything eventually passes: storms, grief, even hope, if you're not careful to guard it. She pulled Sophia's photograph close to her chest and whispered the same promise she made every night: that she would find a way back to the life she had lost, that she would make her daughter proud somehow, someday. When dawn broke over the transformed cityscape, Seattle looked like a war zone. Trees had been uprooted, power lines dangled dangerously, and debris covered every surface. Elena emerged from her shelter to assess the damage, a routine she had perfected during her years on the streets. She had learned that storms often left behind things of value: bottles for recycling, sometimes items that people had dropped in their hurry to find shelter. It was near a clogged storm drain, among the wet leaves and scattered trash, that she spotted the glint of expensive leather. Her heart pounded as she pulled Robert's wallet from the debris, water damaged but intact. When she opened it carefully, Elena's breath caught in her throat. The thick stack of $100 bills seemed to mock her empty stomach and worn clothes. $847, more money than she had seen in the 2 years, 3 months and 16 days since she had lost everything. Elena's hands trembled as she held what could be her salvation. This money could rent her a room for weeks, buy her proper clothes for job interviews, maybe even help her start the long journey back to the nursing career she had abandoned. For a woman who counted every penny she found on the street and celebrated when she could afford A cup of coffee, this wallet represented a miracle. But as Elena examined Robert's driver's license, studying his face and noting his address in the wealthy suburb of Bellevue, something deeper than desperation stirred within her. She thought of Sophia, of the values she had tried to instill in her daughter during their too brief time together. She thought of the nurse she had once been, someone who had taken an oath to help others, to do no harm. The internal struggle that followed was perhaps the most difficult moment of Elena's life on the streets. She sat on a bench, the wallet heavy in her hands, knowing that taking this money would be the easiest thing in the world. No one would ever know. Robert Henderson probably had insurance, certainly had enough wealth that $800 wouldn't devastate his life the way its loss had the potential to transform hers. But Elena would know. And in a life where she had lost nearly everything, her home, her career, her daughter, her sense of self-worth, her integrity remained the one thing that was entirely hers to keep or surrender. The journey from downtown Seattle to Bellevue by public transportation took Elena through a transformation of neighborhoods that served as a stark reminder of how far she had fallen. The gleaming buildings and manicured lawns of Robert's world stood in sharp contrast to the underpasses and shelters that had become her reality. Other passengers on the bus gave her the kind of look she had grown accustomed to, a mixture of fear, disgust, and careful avoidance. When Elena finally stood on the doorstep of Robert's impressive home, she felt the weight of the divide between their worlds. A neighbor had already approached her suspiciously, questioning her presence in their pristine neighborhood. But Elena's resolve never wavered. She had made her choice, and she would see it through. Robert answered the door in the middle of a frantic phone call to his bank, canceling credit cards and trying to report his lost wallet. When he saw Elena standing there holding the very item he thought was lost forever, the phone slipped from his hand. The relief on his face when he confirmed that everything was intact, especially Margaret's photograph, was worth more to Elena than any amount of money could have been. But it was what happened next that neither of them expected. Instead of simply accepting his wallet and leaving, Elena found herself invited into Robert's home, offered coffee and food, and asked to share her story. As she sat uncomfortably on his expensive sofa, Elena began to reveal the journey that had brought her to his doorstep, not just the physical journey of that morning, but the longer, more painful path that had led from a comfortable life as a nurse to sleeping under bridges, the loss of Sophia to a rare illness, the medical bills that insurance couldn't cover, the spiral of grief and debt that had cost her everything. Elena told her story with the quiet dignity of someone who had learned to carry unbearable weight without breaking entirely. Robert listened with the growing realization that he was in the presence of someone extraordinary, someone who had chosen integrity over survival in a moment when no one would have blamed her for choosing otherwise. As their conversation deepened, Robert found himself sharing his own story of loss, of the emptiness that had consumed him since Margaret's death, of the way grief had isolated him from his daughter and made him question the meaning of everything he had built. In Elena's choice to return his wallet, he saw something that had been missing from his world for too long. Evidence that goodness still existed, that character still mattered, that there were people in the world who would do the right thing, even when it cost them everything. When Robert offered to help Elena rebuild her life, it wasn't charity he was offering, but recognition. He saw in her not just someone who needed assistance, but someone whose character and experience could make a difference in the world. As the owner of a healthcare consulting firm, he understood the value of people who combine professional skill with unshakable integrity. Elena's initial resistance to his offer came from pride that had sustained her through the darkest periods of her life. She had survived on the streets by refusing to see herself as a victim, by maintaining her sense of self-worth, even when society treated her as invisible. The idea of accepting help felt like admitting defeat, like confirming that she was indeed the failure that circumstances had made her appear to be. But Robert's offer was different. he wasn't offering to rescue her. He was offering to invest in her. He recognized that her nursing background, combined with her recent experience of the healthcare system's failures, gave her unique insights that could help others. He saw her potential not just for recovery, but for leadership. As the first chapter of Elena's story concluded, she sat in Robert's living room with tears streaming down her face, not just from gratitude, but from the overwhelming realization that her darkest moment had somehow led her to this unexpected door of opportunity. The storm that had taken everything from Robert's pocket had somehow brought them both exactly what they needed. Him, a reminder that goodness still existed in the world, and her, a chance to reclaim not just her life, but her purpose. 1 week after that life-changing conversation in Robert's living room, Elena Martinez sat in her first real home in over 2 years. The furnished studio apartment was modest by most standards, but to someone who had been sleeping under bridges, it felt like a palace. The walls were her own again, the bed was hers alone, and for the first time in years, she could lock a door and know that she was safe. On the small table by the window sat Sophia's photograph in a new frame, catching the morning light that streamed through clean glass. Elena had spent the first night in the apartment simply sitting and looking around, hardly able to believe that this was real, that her decision to return a wallet had somehow led to this moment of dignity restored. Robert's help had been as practical as it was generous. Within days of their meeting, he had connected Elena with a licensing specialist who began the process of reinstating her nursing credentials. The requirements were substantial: continuing education courses, updated certifications, and a comprehensive review of her previous work history. But for the first time in years, Elena had hope that felt solid and achievable. The continuing education classes were held at a community college across town, and Elena approached them with the intensity of someone who understood that this was her one chance to reclaim her professional life. She sat in the front row, took meticulous notes, and asked questions that impressed her instructors with their depth and insight. Her years on the streets had given her perspectives on healthcare that textbooks couldn't teach. She understood vulnerability, trauma, and the way medical bills could destroy lives with a precision that came from lived experience. Sarah Henderson had become an unexpected ally in Elena's transformation. Robert's daughter had initially been skeptical of her father's sudden involvement with a homeless woman, but Elena's sincerity and determination had won her over completely. Sarah helped Elena shop for professional clothes, navigate the bureaucracy of license restoration, and practice for job interviews. Their friendship became one of the unexpected gifts of Elena's new beginning. The job interview at Seattle General Hospital represented everything Elena had been working toward. Dr. Patricia Wells, the chief of nursing, was known for her exacting standards and her ability to see through any pretense. When Elena sat across from her and honestly explained the gap in her employment history, she spoke with the conviction of someone who had nothing left to hide, everything to prove. Elena's assignment to the pediatric ward felt like a gift from the universe, or perhaps from Sophia herself. Walking through those halls, caring for children who were facing their own medical battles, Elena found a way to honor her daughter's memory while building her own future. Every small hand she held, every fear she helped calm, every parent she comforted felt like a conversation with the child she had lost. Her first patient, 8-year-old Lily, was scheduled for surgery and terrified of what might happen. As Elena sat on the edge of the hospital bed, offering comfort to this frightened child, she felt the pieces of her broken heart beginning to reassemble themselves in a new configuration. She couldn't save Sophia, but she could save others. She couldn't go back and change her own medical bankruptcy, but she could prevent others from walking that same devastating path. 3 months into her new position, Elena had become one of the most respected nurses on the pediatric ward. Her colleagues noted her unusual combination of clinical skill and emotional intelligence. her ability to connect with both patients and families in ways that went beyond standard medical care. What they didn't fully understand was that Elena's compassion had been forged in the fire of her own losses, refined by her years of invisibility, and strengthened by her daily choice to see dignity in every human being she encountered. The revelation about Elena's medical debt came when Robert's legal team discovered that her financial ruin had been largely unnecessary. Billing errors, insurance claims that had never been properly filed, and charges that violated several consumer protection laws had created a debt burden that should never have existed. The knowledge that her homelessness could have been prevented was initially devastating, but it also became the foundation for her future mission. As Elena's personal recovery progressed, she began to see patterns in the hospital that reminded her of her own experience. Patients who were intimidated by medical billing, families who didn't understand their insurance options, people who were one medical emergency away from the kind of financial catastrophe that had destroyed her life. She started staying after her shifts to help these families navigate the system, using her combined experience as both a medical professional and a victim of medical bankruptcy. The night that Elena treated her first homeless patient as a nurse was a moment of perfect symmetry. The woman brought to the emergency room could have been Elena herself just 1 year earlier, unconscious from exposure, malnourished, carrying no identification and no hope. As Elena worked to stabilize her vital signs and comfort her during her moments of consciousness, she felt the completion of a circle that had begun with a wallet found in storm debris. Elena's whispered promise to that unnamed patient that the storm would pass, that help was available, that recovery was possible, carried the authority of someone who had lived through the worst and emerged not just intact, but stronger. When the woman's eyes fluttered open and she asked if she would be okay, Elena's yes was backed by absolute certainty born from experience. 1 year after finding Robert's wallet, Elena returned to his house under completely different circumstances. She drove her own modest car, wore clothes she had purchased with money she had earned, and carried herself with the confidence of someone who had not just survived, but thrived. The envelope she brought contained $800, not the money from the wallet, but money she had earned as a nurse, money that represented her complete transformation from recipient to contributor. Robert's confusion when Elena insisted on repaying the money from his wallet revealed the depth of her transformation. This wasn't about the original $800, which had never been hers to begin with. This was about proving to herself that she could give instead of just receive, that she had become someone who could lift others up instead of just struggling to survive. The program Elena proposed, using her position at the hospital to help homeless patients navigate both medical care and social services, represented the culmination of everything she had learned on both sides of the healthcare system. She understood medical procedures as a nurse and medical bankruptcy as a victim. She knew how to navigate hospital bureaucracy as a professional and how to survive on the streets as someone who had been forgotten by the system. Robert's decision to tear up Elena's check and donate it to her program was more than a gesture of support. It was recognition that Elena had achieved something he was still working toward, the ability to transform personal tragedy into public good, to use her own wounds as a source of healing for others. The revelation that Robert's company had already been indirectly helping Elena before they met added a layer of meaning to their connection that neither had expected. Henderson Medical Consulting had worked with Children's Hospital to prevent exactly the kind of billing errors that had destroyed Elena's life. In helping to fix a broken system, Robert had unknowingly been preparing the path for Elena's eventual recovery. This discovery reinforced Elena's growing belief that their meeting hadn't been random chance, but rather the universe's way of bringing together two people who needed each other's particular gifts. Robert needed to remember that his work had human faces and real consequences. Elena needed to see that systemic change was possible, that individual tragedy could be transformed into collective healing. the opening of the Elena Martinez Patient Advocacy Center 2 years later represented more than one woman's recovery. It was proof that integrity, compassion, and determination could create lasting change. The center became a model for hospitals across the country, combining medical care with financial advocacy, trauma counseling, and practical support for housing and employment. Elena's speech at the center's opening acknowledged the strange mathematics of loss and recovery that had brought her to that moment. She had lost a daughter, a home, a career, and nearly her sense of self-worth. But in choosing integrity over desperation on that storm-soaked morning, she had gained something even more valuable: the knowledge that her worst moments didn't define her worth, and that her greatest suffering could become the source of her most meaningful contribution. The wall of photographs in Elena's office told the ongoing story of the center's impact. Former homeless individuals who had become nurses, teachers, social workers, and advocates. Each face represented a life that had been touched by Elena's belief that everyone deserved this second chance, that storms eventually pass, and that sometimes our most devastating setbacks are actually redirections toward our true purpose. 5 years after finding Robert's wallet, Elena Martinez had become one of the most influential patient advocates in the Pacific Northwest. Medical schools invited her to lecture on healthcare equity. Hospitals across the country implemented versions of her advocacy model. Homeless shelters partnered with her center to provide comprehensive care that addressed both immediate needs and long-term recovery. But perhaps Elena's greatest achievement was less tangible: the countless moments when her example reminded others that character is revealed not in moments of abundance, but in moments of scarcity. Her story became a testament to the idea that integrity is the one possession that can never be taken away, only surrendered, and that sometimes holding onto it in our darkest moments is what illuminates the path to our brightest future. The final image of Elena's transformation, walking past the same storm drain where she had found Robert's wallet, now heading home from another successful day at the center, completed a circle that had begun with a choice. On that rain-soaked morning, Elena had chosen to be the person her daughter would be proud of, even when no one was watching. That choice had not just changed her life, it had created ripples of change that would continue long after her story ended. In the end, Elena Martinez learned that the most powerful storms don't come to destroy us, but to strip away everything that isn't essential, leaving only what truly matters: our character, our capacity for growth, and our ability to transform our deepest wounds into sources of healing for others. And Robert Henderson discovered that the greatest return on investment isn't measured in dollars, but in the human lives that are transformed when someone believes in their potential for redemption. The wallet that had been lost in one storm had been found by someone who was living through a storm of her own. But storms, Elena had learned, always pass. And sometimes, what emerges from the wreckage is more beautiful than what existed before the winds began to blow.
Thank you for watching this story unfold with us here on M&A The Story Unfolds. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new tale. We'd love to know where you're watching from. Leave a comment below and tell us what part of the world you're joining us from. Your support means everything. See you in the next story.